You've done it again. Lying in bed, replaying a conversation from 3 days ago. Rewriting what you said. Rehearsing what you should have said. Building entire alternate timelines in your head where you were funnier, sharper, more present. And the strange part? You're not even sure which version is real anymore. The memory has been handled so many times it's worn smooth. Like a stone in your pocket you keep turning over. Each time you touch it, it changes shape. This isn't nostalgia. It's not reflection. It's something else entirely. You're constantly revising the narrative of your own life, editing scenes that already happened, changing the dialogue, altering your motivations. Sometimes you're the hero who was misunderstood. Sometimes you're the villain who ruined everything. The story shifts depending on your mood, your audience, or what you ate for breakfast. And it's exhausting, because you can't settle on a version that feels true. Every draft reveals another flaw, another angle you didn't consider, another way you could have been better, kinder, smarter. Psychologists call this narrative identity. It's the ongoing story you tell yourself about who you are. And here's the uncomfortable truth. Your brain is rewriting it constantly. Not because you're dishonest, but because memory isn't a recording. It's a reconstruction. Every time you recall something, your brain rebuilds it from fragments. Sensory details from the hippocampus, emotional context from the amygdala, meaning and interpretation from the prefrontal cortex. And in that rebuilding, details shift. Emotions get amplified or muted. Meaning gets reassigned. Facts get rearranged to fit the narrative you need right now. Neuroscientist Elizabeth Loftus proved this decades ago. She showed people could be convinced they were lost in a mall as a child, even when it never happened. The brain fills gaps with plausible fiction. It smooths contradictions. It creates coherence where there was chaos. Because coherence feels safer than confusion. Your mind would rather tell you a consistent story than an accurate one. You might think this makes you unreliable, that you can't trust your own mind, that you're somehow gaslighting yourself. But here's the reframe. You're not broken. You're adaptive. Your brain isn't trying to deceive you. It's trying to survive. Think of your life story like a river. The water is always moving. The shape of the banks changes over time. What flows through it now isn't the same as what flowed through it last year. Sediment builds up. Currents shift direction. New tributaries appear. But it's still the same river. Your identity works the same way. It has continuity, but not rigidity. The person you were at 15 still exists in you, but the story you tell about that person has evolved. Maybe back then you thought you were shy. Now you realize you were just observant. Maybe you thought you were selfish. Now you see you were protecting yourself. And that's not weakness. That's growth. The problem only arises when you lose track of the editing, when you start believing every draft is the final truth, when you forget that all stories are interpretations, not facts. Let's go deeper into the mechanism. Your brain has two systems working in tension. The first is the hippocampus. It encodes episodic memory, specific events, sensory details, timestamps. It says, this happened at this time in this place. The second is the prefrontal cortex. It builds meaning, imposes structure, creates narrative. It says, this is what it means about who I am. When you recall a memory, the hippocampus retrieves fragments, a smell, a facial expression, the texture of a chair you were sitting in. But the prefrontal cortex steps in immediately. It asks, what does this mean about me? And that's where the rewriting happens. Because meaning isn't fixed. The breakup at 22 might feel like rejection, like proof that you're unlovable. At 30, it might feel like liberation, like evidence that you finally learned to set boundaries. Same event, different meaning, different story. Your brain doesn't store one version. It stores the version that fits your current self-concept, the version that makes sense of who you're trying to be right now. Psychologist Dan McAdams calls this the redemptive self. We have a bias toward stories where pain leads to growth, where struggle leads to strength, where the worst moments become turning points. It's not just optimism, it's a cognitive strategy. It helps us tolerate hardship. It gives suffering a purpose. But it also means we're constantly retrofitting our past to justify our present. We need the story to make sense, even if that means bending the truth. And here's where it gets complicated. Sometimes the rewriting is healthy. It's how we integrate trauma, how we forgive ourselves, how we make peace with choices we can't undo. But sometimes the rewriting becomes a prison. You get stuck in endless revision, trying to find the version that absolves you, or the version that explains why you're still struggling. You're not remembering anymore, you're rehearsing. And rehearsal doesn't bring closure, it brings obsession. So how do you stop the spiral? How do you hold your story lightly without losing yourself entirely? Here's a framework rooted in psychology. First, distinguish between memory and interpretation. When you recall something, pause. Ask yourself, what actually happened? What did I see, hear, feel in my body? Then ask, what did I decide it meant? These are two different things. The event is data. The meaning is a choice. You can hold the data steady while allowing the meaning to evolve. This is what therapists call cognitive diffusion. You're not erasing the memory, you're loosening its grip. You're recognizing that your interpretation is one possibility, not the only truth. Second, notice the emotional color of your revisions. When you rewrite a memory, what emotion are you trying to resolve? Shame? Regret? Anger? Guilt? Often you're not correcting the past, you're soothing the present. Your brain is saying, if I can just fix that moment, I'll feel better now. If I can just figure out what I should have said, the discomfort will stop. But it doesn't work, because the discomfort isn't in the past, it's in how you're relating to it now. Neuroscience shows that emotional regulation happens in real time, not retroactively. You can't edit your way to peace. You can only accept your way there. Third, write it down, literally. Journaling externalizes the narrative. It moves the story from your head to the page. And once it's outside you, you can see it more clearly. You can notice patterns. You can spot contradictions. You can ask, is this the story I want to keep telling? Psychologist James Pennebaker found that expressive writing reduces rumination. It gives the prefrontal cortex something concrete to work with. Instead of endless mental loops, you create a fixed artifact. And that artifact can evolve without consuming you. It stops the endless looping. Write the memory as you remember it today. Then, if you want, write it again tomorrow. Notice what changed. Not to find the truth, but to see how your relationship to the event is shifting. Fourth, hold multiple drafts simultaneously. You don't have to choose one true version. You can say, this is how I felt then. This is how I see it now. Both are real. This is what philosopher Kierkegaard called living forward, understanding backward. You experience life in the moment, raw and uninterpreted, but you only make sense of it later, through the lens of everything that came after. And that sense-making will change as you do, as you gain new experiences, as you develop new frameworks, as you become a different person. That's not confusion, that's complexity. That's the nature of being human. Fifth, ask what the current draft is protecting. Every version of your story serves a purpose. Sometimes you cast yourself as the victim to avoid responsibility. If it was all done to you, you don't have to face the ways you participated. Sometimes you cast yourself as the villain to avoid vulnerability. If you were the bad guy, you don't have to admit you were hurt. Both are defense mechanisms. Psychoanalysts call this narrative defense. You shape the story to protect your ego, to maintain a sense of control, to avoid feelings too dangerous to feel. But protection comes at a cost. It limits growth. It keeps you stuck in outdated versions of yourself. So ask, what would I have to face if I told this differently? What truth am I avoiding? What feeling am I not ready to hold? That's where the real work begins. Here's the integration. Your life story is not a monument. It's not a fixed structure you build once and preserve forever. It's a conversation between who you were, who you are, and who you're becoming. The past speaks, the present listens, the future interprets, and all three are happening at once. When you understand this, something shifts. You stop trying to get the story right. You start asking, what story serves me now? Not in a manipulative way, but in a compassionate one. You give yourself permission to evolve, to see the same event through different eyes, to hold the paradox that you are both continuous and changing. The brain's need for narrative isn't a flaw. It's how we make meaning in a chaotic world. It's how we string together disconnected moments into something coherent, something that feels like a self. But meaning is not the same as truth, and the story you tell is not the same as the life you lived. You can honor both. You can acknowledge the facts while releasing your grip on their meaning. You can remember without being imprisoned by memory. You don't need to stop rewriting. You just need to notice when you're doing it and ask yourself, why? Sometimes the revision brings clarity. Sometimes it brings comfort. And sometimes it just brings distance from something too painful to hold. All of that is okay. You're not a fixed text. You're a living document, and the pen is always in your hand. The story will keep changing because you keep changing. And that's not something to fix, it's something to trust.